Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Julie with Jovi Star Astrology. I hope you're all doing good today. Uh, it is still Virgo season, and we still have a new moon in Virgo coming up this month on the 15th, and we just had a full moon in Pisces, Pisces Virgo axis. They go hand in hand, the opposite signs. We had a full moon in Pisces last Wednesday, which I talked a little bit about in my most recent video. And so, in honor of Virgo season, and taking the opportunity to sort of show you how astrology can work within the lives of real people and through event charts. It's a really great way to study astrology and gain an understanding of how astrology works. As a student of astrology and a practitioner of astrology, it's something that I do all the time, and I know many other astrologers do. It's a great way to learn and gain understanding, especially if your mind works, the way especially if the way that you learn is by actually experiencing something, which it couldn't hold more true for me. But I mentioned a few charts in my last video, and I thought it would be a great time to come on and pull up a couple of chart examples to show you how the astrology is showing up in Virgo and in Pisces during Virgo season. And of course, we know Saturn is transiting through the sign of Pisces and was a very big player in the last full moon. So I would like to show you some examples. If you have any questions about it, drop them down in the comment box. And as you know, anybody that comments on my channel, I reply. But this is fun, and in no way is this a full chart reading because that would take forever. It's just I'll just throw up some charts and point out some examples and explain to you the event that occurred. And I think you'll be amazed at how astrology can be so accurate a lot of times, and most all the time for me. I see it as something that is very, very accurate. Yeah, it's hard sometimes to pinpoint any specific details, right? But you can use astrology to definitely get to the essence of things that are going on. Outside of us through transits, and also, how we react to things by the placements in our birth chart. So I'm going to start with America's friend, Bob Barker, who lost his life on August the 26th, which is 4 days before the full moon in Pisces. I mentioned him in the last video, and take a look at how the transiting planets were hitting his chart, and how you can see that it was basically time for him to go. Now, before I show the chart, I don't want to, give any impressions that what I'm trying to do here is to solicit my services for reading and predicting death, because most astrologers, reputable astrologers, don't do that and won't do that, even if they can see things in a chart. And it's certainly not something that I want to start predicting for other people. But it's a very good example to use, and there will be a couple of those in this video. So I'm going to throw on my trusty glasses here and share the first chart so that we can take a look and see what was going on that day for Bob Barker. And of course, if you guys don't know who Bob Barker is, he was the longtime host of the show of The Price is Right. And he recently died on August 26th. Again, just 4 days before the full moon in Pisces. And I think I mentioned in my last video that, when things hit the sun, moon, rising, and definitely the angles on folks' charts, things can happen, or the houses that represent the angles. So we're talking about the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, and the 10th house it's likely that some kind of event will occur. Doesn't have to be something as final as Bob Barker experienced, obviously. Don't and as that's another thing going through this chart. I'm not. It doesn't mean that the placements that I'll be identifying, that those placements or transits mean death for every person every time, because it absolutely doesn't. There's a whole lot more that goes into it than that. But let's get acquainted with our friend. He is a Scorpio rising, ruled by Mars and ruled by Pluto. He has Pluto in Cancer. He has Mars and Scorpio right on his ascendant. It's exactly the same degree. He is a Sagittarius sun over here in the second house, and he's a moon in Aquarius, which probably is responsible for some of his humor, comedy. He was a little bit funny, maybe a little bit quirky, but those are his three major planets. Again, not going into the whole chart. I know we're calling them in astrology the big three. There's a whole lot more to astrology than that, but it's always good to start when you're looking at a chart by looking at those particular placements. Okay, so having Mars conjunct his first house, his rising sign, which represents the body, and how he presents himself to the world, is very significant. It actually tells me that he was a very strong. Mars is physical, a physical sign. It represents strength. And in the sign of Scorpio, that's a lot of the ability to continue to regenerate. And for him, that would be physically. Well, we know that he lived to be 99 years old. On December 12th, he would have been 100 years old. So that holds true. Here you can see his sun, like I said, his sun is in Sag, but also his Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius. So that's a very strong Jupiter in the second house of earned income. We're going to go with that for him. Self-esteem. And that tells me that Bob Barker was here to make his money and be recognized and find his personal value through Sagittarian type things. And when you think of Sagittarius, I mean, Sagittarius it's a social sign. Jupiter is a social planet. Very outspoken and quippy, can be very high profile, very knowledgeable. And we know that those things describe Bob Barker. Having Jupiter in your second house of earned income, chances are somebody with Jupiter in the second house, especially in its in the sign that it rules, is going to indicate very good fortune and income and possibly even fame. His sun in Sag rules the 10th house up here, which is Leo. And so that indicates that he would be very high profile, doing the job that he did to sustain his life. And we know that that holds true for Bob Barker as well. Okay. So looking at the transits for the day that Bob Barker died, and you know that I like to focus in on the nodes, and Bob Barker had nodes, his nodes of the moon in Virgo and Pisces, South Node Pisces, North Node Virgo. And when we're looking at it from a transit standpoint, the nodes can also represent exit and entry points as well. So energies coming in move us along our evolutionary path. So in Bob Barker's case, we see Saturn transiting Pisces was sitting right on his south node, which is the past or letting go of something. And Saturn in the sign of Pisces can represent illness, It can represent an ending of some sort of life. Pisces rules the 12th house, which is ruled by Neptune and Jupiter, and that can represent endings. Sitting conjunct his south node, that's pretty amazing. While the sun in Virgo was conjunct his north node, indicating, and the sun is life, right? And we have Virgo, it's talking about health and the body. We're going to go with that in this case, and work, of course. That, we know that his north node path was to be of service, Virgo, in some way in his career. 10th house is very high profile, which we know he was. The sun conjunct his north node, when I read this, tells me that his work was done, right? And he experienced the completion of that through his death, right? Through the body. So that is a very interesting opposition there, that the sun and Saturn, which can stop things and end things, are on his north and south node. Now, additionally, he had the south node that's currently transiting in the sign of Libra in his 12th house of endings, conjunct his Saturn. Isn't that interesting, right? Saturn in the 12th house, in the sign of Libra. Bob Barker was here, likely to clear karma, potentially from past lives, maybe having to do with the father. Relationships definitely in the sign of Libra. And the south node was coming into conjunction with his natal Saturn. So there we have another correlation. We also have, and this is right before we were coming into the full moon that would have occurred over here, if it got that far, almost conjunct, or just would have been just past Saturn, because the full moon occurred at 7 degrees. And actually, in my last video, when I was explaining something, I realized retrospectively that I switched the degrees, and I was saying Saturn was at 7. Anyway, sorry about that, but they were conjunct, so working hand in hand. So the moon's coming into a conjunction with Saturn that will, a few days later, created the full moon in Pisces on the 30th. And I talked about that, the full moon in Pisces could have represented an ending of some sort, right? For some people. And it did. Now, going further, so that's just amazing to me, right? You see these things. Another thing that I noticed is that Bob Barker had Chiron, natal Chiron, in the 6th house, which is the house of work and service and health. And transiting Chiron was coming into conjunction with his natal Chiron. Now that alone, wouldn't necessarily, none of these things, again, if you were to see transits like this in others' charts, it may not turn out this way. But what the natal Chiron coming into conjunction in the 6th house of health kind of tells me that he may have, well, first of all, having a Chiron in Aries in the 6th house, he may have been accident prone a lot of his life. He may have incurred, some head injuries. He could have just even been bumping his head or falling and hitting his head. The 6th house is the house of accidents. But I did read that he had recently become, in these recent years, he had actually fallen and hit his head many times. But we know that Chiron in Aries, Chiron represents our internal wounding, our personal wounding. And in the sign of Aries, it's about our physical body in the 6th house, which does represent the body as well. So it's amazing that we see that Bob Barker's ending, hit the end of his life, came to pass just before this full moon was coming into play. Now, also interesting. So here we have the moon, and I picked a noon chart, and again, you never know. I couldn't find the exact time of death. That's not usually something you can see unless you have a death certificate. But so I picked noon, and it just happened to come up that the moon in Capricorn was conjunct his natal Mercury. Now, if we think about Mercury, and Capricorn rules structure and work and old age. Saturn represents aging, and sign of Capricorn, it has a lot to do with your physical structure, your bones and things like that. He has Mercury in Capricorn, which made him a very practical person, right? He was articulate in the way he spoke, and we know that from watching him on TV. But the correlation here with this, looking at the day of his death, is that Mercury rules his 8th house, which is in the sign of Gemini. And the 8th house represents, among other things, obviously, the house of death. So we have the moon coming into passing over, and the moon represents our environment and our emotions and our feelings in many ways. And when we watch the moon go around and we track the moon's path, the moon, when hitting certain points, we usually see that there something is triggered many times. Not that, I mean, if we're looking for a specific area of life, we might be able to tell if we have a start date of an issue, when something might be triggered by tracking the moon. But the moon was conjunct the ruler of his 8th house, which is the house of death. In this case, passing over and triggering that Mercury, which triggered his death. Now, and to me, because Mercury rules breathing, the lungs, right? That he probably passed very quietly, and just, stopped breathing. He has a few other things that kind of tell me, some things possibly, right? He may have had people there taking care of him. 11th house. I don't think he was in a hospital, but he could have had some help. And we also see here that he had Pluto going through his 3rd house. And 3rd house is the house of the mind and communication. When I look at this, and knowing that Pluto is one of the rulers of his ascendant, which is him and his body, and it tells me that over these years he likely had diminished mental capacities. So I mean, he was 99, dementia, maybe. I don't think he had Alzheimer's, but obviously I think he probably struggled cognitively in recent years. And, when you look at Pluto in the 3rd house, I mean, wherever Pluto's transiting, that over time there is some kind of slow breakdown or change for a person, for all of us, wherever Pluto's transiting our chart. Of note, just about his life. So isn't that amazing? Of note, just about his life, we see here he had Neptune and Leo at the top of his chart, which tells me that the work that he was here to do needed to have a spiritual component attached to it. We know that he was an animal rights activist. He took care of animals, and spent a lot of time and work on charitable organizations doing that. And also having Neptune in the 10th house at the top of the chart, in the sign of Leo, which is big and bright and bold, also does represent and indicate that he will be in the limelight somehow, in some kind of an elusive way, right? Neptune, in addition to his need to make his work associated to spirituality. But Neptune rules screens, right? And he was on the TV for a really long time, a very, very long time. So that's my first example. This is how the full moon, Bob Barker's soul, chose to use this full moon time period as exit. But I honestly, it's like, we know he was older, he lived a long life, he did a lot of things, and it was just time, right? This couldn't be a more clear example of the fact that his karma was fulfilled, and the work that he was doing in this life was done. We don't know. What will he be doing next? We don't know. All right. So that is the example for Bob Barker. And I am going to stop the share. All right. Isn't that crazy? Absolutely love doing this stuff. Okay. All right. Bear with me. We're going to get into another chart of a famous Virgo rising that could have been affected by the full moon as well, and definitely has some action going on in Virgo season, being a Virgo rising and having Mercury retrograde in Virgo. I mentioned him in my last video as well. And I said that we probably wouldn't know, at least from him, speaking about it, exactly what was going on if something was going on in his life. So we really don't know, but we can speculate. I took a look at his chart and I do see a few things that are kind of telling and potential. Based on what we know about him publicly right now. And he does keep a low profile. And, it's hard for celebrities to keep a low profile, but I have a feeling that he filters out very strategically information so that he gives something, but he holds back the juicy stuff is my that's my best guess. So I'm gonna pull his chart up in the background here, and then we'll take a look at that. How's everybody doing? Staying with me, hopefully. All right. Just 1 second. I love to do this stuff. And again, like I said, anybody that studies astrology does this. And I'm part of a lot of online astrology groups, and it's constant. People are trying to learn astrology by studying charts, their own charts, as well as charts of other people, to try and understand the cycles of life and the things that are going on. And it's just constantly, that's how people are learning, and that's how I learn. And I actually use this type of thing as a tool to mentor people and teach people. It's a great way to learn. So if you're somebody who is curious about astrology and wants to learn about your own chart, as well as how planetary energies, and how to read charts for other people, and then eventually into transits, I'd love to work with you and teach you. I have a student that I've been working with now, and it's been great. It does give you a very in-depth look at astrology. It's good to know some of the basics of astrology before doing something like that, but it's basically, collaboration and breaking down charts and coming up with different dynamic possibilities. And it's a great way to learn. So yeah, if you're interested in something like that, get a hold of me. And, it is one-on-one for the most part, but I'd be happy to do up to 2 or 3 people at a time, probably not more than that, because it can get pretty involved. And, if you had more than one person, you could certainly share some of the cost, but it's always fun to do that. So, okay, we're going to pull up the next one here. So here we have the chart of Keanu Reeves, who I also mentioned in my last video. And Keanu Reeves is a Virgo rising. And we can see that here, Virgo rising. And he has a sun in Virgo, conjunct his Mercury in the 12th house, right? Very Piscean in the 12th house, very private in the 12th house. This person, Mercury, the mind, the sun, his soul, the main plot line of his life. He does a lot behind the scenes, very intelligent person, but keeps a lot to himself, which is why I said we probably don't see the whole of Keanu Reeves. Very elusive, but at the same time, very intelligent and practical, and probably knows how to filter the information that he wants out in the public and how to hold back when he doesn't. So Sun in Virgo conjunct Mercury. He has a moon in Cancer, making him pretty sensitive. Cancer, the water sign, and also, a lot of people don't think about qualities of Cancer, but Cancer is very protective. And so they can be very walled up and very protective when it comes to their deep emotions. And we may not see those now. He has his moon in the 11th house. So, that's his networks and how people see him. And, everybody loves Keanu Reeves, right? We know that he is altruistic and that he's been known to actually take care of Cancer. People, strangers on the street that seem to need help in terms of food, Cancer, shelter, Cancer, blankets, coats. He's done all of those things. I think I read one time where he actually, probably more than once, he actually gave somebody on the streets like his coat or something, which is very representative of this moon placement. All right, so we see, and there's a lot more, of course, that we could talk about where he's concerned. The fact that he has Neptune and Scorpio on the cusp of his third house, which is the mind, how he communicates. It's very mysterious, but very deep and significant. And Neptune again screens. He's probably a brilliant writer, and of course we know he's a brilliant communicator and actor. This is a guy that has the ability to really see a different dimension. Neptune in the third house in Scorpio, very intuitive. He has Jupiter up here in the sign of Taurus in the 9th house. And although it's not Jupiter in Taurus, it's not necessarily in its dignity, Jupiter in the 9th house is, and this makes him a very practical person, a teacher, somebody who's probably very concerned about things like the environment. And I bet very concerned about what's going on these days with food and medicines and what we're putting in our body, and of course how the environment and the earth is reacting to human us, to a human population or human use. So all right, back to the full moon. So he has Pisces on the 7th house. So we've got angles here, and we have this full moon that happened in his 6th house and in his 12th house. And he also has, as of note here, a natal Saturn in Pisces. So Keanu Reeves is having his Saturn return in the 6th house, house of work and service and health, and his natal Saturn there. Again, we can say that his work is behind the scenes, in his screens, right? We see it's fantasy, a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, which screens and fantasy and sci-fi is all Pisces themes, and Saturn is work. So that is definitely another way we can describe Keanu Reeves. That he's very altruistic too. The 6th house is a house of service, and so he helps people that are struggling, right? Are struggling. Probably a lot of those people that he's met on the streets, they have mental health issues, maybe addiction issues, things that all fall under the sign of Pisces. He may himself, because this is the 6th house, he may himself have bouts of depression, or difficulties with catching viruses and things like that, or the fact that he has Saturn there may make him very strong and immune, and could put up a block. We really don't know. I don't know much about Keanu Reeves' health, but he does have a natal Saturn Pisces, so he is having his Saturn return. And I said yesterday, anybody that that has Virgo, Pisces, Gemini, Sag, especially those that are having their Saturn return in the sign of Pisces, these can be really heavy times depending on where you're at in life, what's going on. And so give your mutable sign placement folks a hug and a call and reach out, because especially if you have significant Pisces placements, you can be very quiet and sort of just, kind of hold the sadness in. That's very Saturn Pisces, separating yourself. Pisces is very much about sacrifice and escapism and, suffering in some ways. Most people with Pisces placements, like, they come into this world to be of service, right? And to feel everything around them. And that isn't an easy life. The Virgo Pisces axis can be pretty difficult, unless it can be balanced. And, we can't always operate in balance throughout our entire life. But we have this full moon here that happened on, I want to take that, there we go, on August 30th for Keanu Reeves. And it was in his 12th house. So likely very private. It could have been just about his own thoughts and his own work, and maybe he was working on something behind the scenes. He could have been working on something behind the scenes. Virgo is writing, speaking, and something could have stopped a project. For instance, this full moon, Saturn conjunct the moon. The moon also represents a female energy, female. So I wonder if, maybe there was something that came up with his mother, possibly. He does have Neptune in his 7th house. So, his relationships might be under construction, sort of, or just morphing into something that is very spiritual. And he has a Chiron in Pisces, his wounding, his own personal wounding. He has Chiron in Pisces, which can be a lot about sacrifice and difficulties and suffering in some ways. And when you have that on the cusp of your 7th house, which is about relationships, we can say that Keanu Reeves has had difficulties in relationships, maybe losses due to death, right? Possible Pisces, or due to mental illness or substance abuse issues. He could be, so indicates that there has been some kind of suffering in those areas, and that his job in this life was to actually use that and actually, kind of be the one that reaches out and provides those things and sort of experiences some kind of a rebirth in the area of his relationships, or recovery of some sort, through providing service or having empathy or feelings in the area of his relationships. But the full moon occurred in his 12th and his 6th house. So it's about work, something potentially behind the scenes. And we know that there's a writer's strike right now. We know that this, Venus, which was still in retrograde at the time, in the 11th house, maybe there was a project or something that he wanted to do publicly that was being held up because of the writers and actors strike. And, he could have experienced, and even, gotten some information or some news. Hopefully it was that and not something regarding his health. And that, maybe it was time for him to redirect his energy into other things. Now, Saturn, his natal Saturn rules his 5th house, which is the house of joy and pleasures, hobbies, romance, children, other things like that. But when I look at this for Keanu Reeves, having his Saturn in the 6th house of work and service, and also Pisces is very creative, and a lot of people with Pisces placements can be very musical and artistic in many ways. And so having hit the ruler of his 5th house in Pisces, and that being Capricorn, kind of tells me that his hobbies, right, the things that he loves to do, are part of his work. And we know that. And in Capricorn, it can be very traditional type things. Now, one thing I did read about him lately is that he has begun going on tour with a band again. And I know he played here locally in my area in Phoenix. I don't know, maybe it was last week. I read it somewhere, but having Jupiter he's coming into his Jupiter return in the ninth house, right? So this is about his beliefs. It can be about travel. This could have been about, a problem with something that he was supposed to do overseas or in another country, or there was supposed to be some kind of even publishing. Maybe there was a book that was supposed to come out that he'd been writing, right? That his 12th house placements there would definitely indicate that. And I think he has written a book or two. But we had the squares here, which I talked about, from Leo to Venus and Leo to Uranus and Jupiter in the sign of Taurus. Some of his travel plans or his work plans could have been disrupted as well. Taurus also rules the neck, the throat, and the neck. So our singing voice, and having some kind of expansion there in that area for him completely makes sense. So that might be going on in his life right now. And because Jupiter is ruling this this full moon, there could have been blocks or just issues or restraints or mandates. This could have to do with, how can I travel? There are mandates because of, coming into the season, whether it's flu season and of course the virus. And I talked a little bit about how those mandates were coming back. Could have been any number of those things, but likely something like that affected Keanu Reeves, if not, something health-wise, right? Or because the moon is there, maybe something, I hope not, with the mother, or possibly a partner, right? But we'll go with the work stuff because that looks very likely to me. And he has Pluto going through his fifth house, which is changing his expression, right? And the things that he does. So we may start to see him do different types of movies or less movie type things and more creative things like music or writing. You never know. Okay, so that is Keanu Reeves, how he may have experienced this full moon. And there's a lot more we could look at and break down here. Again, I'm not going to go through the entire chart, but, well, I will point out he has Mars in the sign of Libra, which can be negotiations, other people, relationships. Mars can be aggressive. He's got Mercury there, which is in retrograde, indicating that there's some kind of hiccup possibly in terms of, negotiating something or figuring out some kind of a work issue. Maybe there is something going on. Maybe this doubles down on something with the writer's strike that's causing him some issues and turning him around, and it could be affecting his income or his obligations in some way, although I think he probably has a ton of money only because Mars rules his eighth house and his third house, which is his immediate environment, and also the mind and communication, things that he writes. So, and local travel. So I don't know, keep your eyes and ears out. Let's see what happens if we hear anything about what might have happened to Keanu Reeves. But so far, or what might be going on for him. But so far, what I saw was that he's traveling more for in a band for his, sharing his music. Okay. All right. So that's that example. And then we have one more example that I'm going to throw up here. And then we'll wrap it up. Hopefully this is amazing to you. It's amazing. It amazes me over and over and over again. And, you can learn to do this too. You have to know the basics, right? I mean, it takes time. It takes time and study. And when we get excited about, looking at things that actually happen, and, most people really are very interested in what's going on in their own life. But when you get excited and you see things like that, it makes you excited about the study of astrology. So that's why I find it a good tool to use to engage myself sometimes outside of just academic stuff, and to teach other people. So it's fun. Astrology can be fun and interesting. All right, I am going to prepare the last chart here that we're going to take a look at. Throw that up for you. This one is pretty complicated, and I actually went over this one with a student very recently. But it's another good example of the Pisces Virgo axis of a Virgo rising. And we'll throw this up here and take a look at that. Oops, let me just make sure I have the right. Yes, okay. All right, so here we have the chart of Kurt Cobain, who we know was a famous grunge rocker. Back in the 80s and 90s, I loved Kurt Cobain. He was one of my favorites. Many people's favorites. He was a great artist and a great musician. So we have Kurt Cobain here, another Virgo rising. So I said, be very kind to your Virgo. The Virgo, people with Virgo placements and Pisces placements in their charts right now. Gemini and Sag too. Another Virgo rising and another person who had 12th house placements, except he had Pluto and Uranus in his 12th house, which can make for a very intense inner world, right? Subconscious and, potentially struggles with the mind, very intense. And we have so you can see has a lot of Virgo placements. Virgo's ruled by Mercury, and his Mercury is over here in the 6th house, the house of health and routines. 6th house is also the house of habits, including bad habits, I should say, things that might hurt us. But he has a ton of Pisces planets, making that Virgo Pisces axis very intense for him, including a sun in Pisces. So mutable, he has mutable Earth, Virgo rising with Mercury representing that rising sign in the mutable water sign of Pisces, as well as a Pisces sun, all, both in the 6th house, right? So Mercury is his chart ruler. So it's kind of like the driver of his chart and of his persona. So those are heavy Pisces placements. His moon is up here in the sign of Cancer, another very emotional watery sign. We saw that moon in Cancer with Keanu Reeves. Kurt Cobain's is up in his 10th house, which represents his career. We know that his music was very emotional, as a writer. It was about his personal experiences, how he was feeling, probably his home life, all moon and Cancer things. If you look here at Kurt Cobain, which is interesting, all of this water can be very, very difficult, but his moon was trine his south node in Scorpio in the 2nd house, another water sign, which was trining all of his Pisces. Mercury mostly. I'm not drawing very good, but he had a heavy water influence in his chart, which tells us he was very emotional, very sensitive. With all that Pisces in the 6th house, this is a guy that not only had physical ailments, and sometimes in the sign of Pisces, it can be sort of like somatic type things, which means it's kind of like, well, his environment and the things that were going on in his life, and emotional things, very sensitive to those things, which likely affected his body. But I do know that he had physical issues, ailments, stomach issues, which would coincide with the moon in Cancer and the Pisces placements in the 6th house. So this is a person who, from a very young age, probably experienced a lot of emotional intensity, sensitivity. We have Mercury, which is the mind. Talked about what that means in Pisces in the 6th house, which is health and also be mental health, in an opposition to his 12th house Uranus, which is the higher mind, but also represents anxieties, and Pluto, which can be, a very intense, powerful, as you all know, placement in the 12th house of the subconscious. So, Kurt Cobain had a lot of challenges. This opposition to his Mercury, this is representative potentially of bipolar issues, but serious mental health issues, sadness, substance abuse for sure, with all of the Pisces in the 6th house. And to double down on that carried through into his relationships. He, like Keanu Reeves, also has his natal Chiron in Pisces in the 7th house, which is that's other people. And he has his Venus there, which is women and love and relationships in the 7th house. So likely he's going to bring in either people that are as creative and musical as he is, or it's a very spiritual type. There are very spiritual type connections, and that may have happened. But also bringing in people that are struggling with potentially the same issues that he had been struggling with for most of his life, all of his life, I would say. Making it even more difficult, right, for him to manage his emotions and his environment. And he had a natal Saturn in Pisces as well. And these transiting planets, I should have said, the planets that are on the outer wheel are the day of his death, April 5th, 1994, in Seattle, Washington. So we're looking at something similar to correlate with the day of his death, like we did with Bob Barker. He had a natal Saturn in Pisces, so he was coming into his Saturn return. Saturn hit his sun first. That can be very depressing. We know that he was in a rehab for trying to get well, substance abuse. At the time of his death, he left that, and he could have very well been feeling the pressure, Saturn conjunct Sun, to actually clean things up. This could have been very sobering. I'm sure that his intention was to do just that. But, Saturn can be heavy, and it could have been, obviously, it was too much pressure. His natal Saturn in the 7th house could have been problems, with Mercury there conjunct his Chiron. Could have been problems in his relationship, maybe with Courtney Love, or maybe the conversations that he was having around his wounding and sacrifice in the rehab, conjunct his Chiron. Maybe it was just bringing back a lot of things that were very difficult for him. I'm not sure. We won't know. He did have on that day Mars in Pisces conjunct his Mercury. So, Mars rules his 8th house, which is the house of death, right? It also rules his 3rd house, which is the house of the mind, where his North Node in Scorpio, his destiny, what he's here to learn, was conjunct Pluto. 3rd house is the house of the mind. Mercury, the house of the planet that represents the mind, and you have Mars there. That there had to be an intensity. Obviously, he wanted to run. His emotions were, too high, too painful. Something was too painful, right? And Mars can mean, leaving, right? Wanting to hurt yourself. Pisces, drugs, being confused, being emotional. And it was trining, this conjunction was trining his North Node and his Pluto. Pluto is a planet of death. North Node is destiny. It's interesting. And that was the North Node, transiting North Node was conjunct his Neptune, which is endings, and all of that affecting his mental state. 3rd house, the house of the mind. So this was a very difficult time for Kurt Cobain. His life was very difficult. He was a very gifted artist. You can see how his creativity for music, and how the emotion he put into it was off the charts, right? He also had transiting Jupiter in Scorpio conjunct his South Node, and Jupiter rules his 4th house, but Jupiter also rules Pisces. where all of this was transiting. So there's an emphasis there. Jupiter makes things bigger, right? It can also be spiritual. The fact that he exited this life when Jupiter was conjunct his south node, kind of shows me that the intensity was, very, very big. I also wondered too, because he had, Venus in the eighth house. I don't know if there were any any money problems or contract problems or any issues with his music or his voice, Venus and Taurus. I don't know if that was the case or not. Venus and Taurus transiting, hitting his north node. I mean, Taurus can be, overdoing things, right? It can be indulgence, right? Taurus is what is sweet and what we need and what makes us feel good. But sometimes that can be too much, right, of a good thing. And it was conjunct his north node. Venus rules his second house. And that's why I said, that's a house of earned income. I'm wondering, like, did he have any issues with contracts or money? Anything in the courts going on. I didn't look into it enough to find anything like that. But Venus also rules his ninth house, which is the house of law and courts. So, maybe, I don't know, I kind of vaguely remember, like, maybe there was some kind of a issue with custody and whether he could see his children. My student actually told me that when we were going over this chart. So I'm recalling that right now, and that could have been. And he also had transiting Chiron going into his third house in Virgo, which is the mind. And again, that Mercury ruled Chiron can be affecting his Mercury in Pisces. And in the 12th house of the mind and the subconscious, and what's hidden, it is work too, Virgo. It is the body and the mind. Something there he wasn't able to pull together for whatever reason. Now, where was transiting Mercury? Oh, transiting Mercury. Well, there you go. Transiting Mercury in the sign of Pisces and the natal Pisces. So there are just so many things in this chart that show that this is a very difficult, sad time for Kurt Cobain, trying to get clean, probably not feeling good physically, mentally, emotionally, very heavy, very sad. And his addiction and his emotional stress and pain just got the best of him. North Node conjunct Neptune, which is endings, right, in the sign of Scorpio. And we know that, unfortunately, Kurt Cobain, or what was reported, is that he shot himself in the head, and Scorpio represents crisis and violence and death, and would definitely represent something like that. He had up his natal Mars conjunct his south node in Scorpio too, and Mars is one of the rulers of Scorpio. And we know that he was angsty, right, in the second house of earned income, his self-esteem, all of those things. He had a very angsty creative expression, right? It was grunge rock, right? Alternative grunge rock, which we all love. So, and he made his living that way. Mars in Scorpio in the second house. There is a correlation, right? A relation to his south node, which is what he came in to do. So he had those gifts when he came in, and he used it to actually make a living and a name for himself, which was very positive. But unfortunately, Mars also ruled his eighth house, which is the house of death, and Mars represents firearms, and the south node is an exit point, right? It's the ending. It's where we came from, but it can be the ending of something. And he unfortunately shot himself. And it's interesting because that's in his natal chart. This Jupiter exacerbated that or hastened it, or who knows? We don't know what the soul's purpose is. Maybe there was a spiritual reason for why it happened at that time. But he came in with the propensity for that to happen. And so much, again, water and intensity and sadness. And but at the same time, brilliance, right? Articulate with his words and how he wrote and created things. But, his Virgo rising, which is usually very practical, right? And organized and able to pull things together when you are saddled on the other side, oppositions, right? Trying to balance things out, and your sun is there, and it's in Pisces, and the ruler again of your rising is in Pisces. This is a lot. This is a difficult life. When I looked at his chart, it was actually my student that suggested it. Thank you, Susanna. I saw, wow, this was a really difficult life. And, his creativity and his music probably was what kept him going for as long as he was able to. Um, and had he been able, I believe, had he been able to continue that in some way and even use his creativity to help other people that were struggling, and somehow be a spokesperson, I think that could have been what it may have been down the pipe, or the next thing that he could have done if he could have gotten clean. And that would have, along with his creative abilities and his ability to get the attention of people in the community when it comes to mental illness and drug abuse, he could have been very influential in doing that. But that obviously didn't happen, and that wasn't in the plan. But there you go. There's Kurt Cobain's chart. You're probably all going, "Oh, why did you depress me?" Definitely not designed to depress you. I just wanted to show you how the astrology is working, and these were significant examples that I felt would be really good experience for all of you to see, how it works, and definitely a tool for learning and understanding astrology better. We do have some good things going on in Virgo, and Virgo season. We have a new moon in Virgo next week. And balancing out that Virgo Pisces, it's like, don't overwork and ignore your creative side or your emotional side, and don't isolate, right? Saturn and Pisces, and ignore the things that you can do for yourself daily. If you're struggling right now, and I know I've had days where I have been, and again, going to say it again, immutable signs, Virgo, Pisces, Gemini, Sag, some of them could be having a really difficult time moving your body, reaching out, and actually trying to talk to somebody, writing things down, Virgo, Pisces, right? Trying to calm the mind, whatever it is that you do spiritually, Pisces, meditation, things like that can help. We have Saturn and Pisces for another 2.5, a little less than 2.5 years. So it's a trek still. And if you have a natal Saturn in Pisces, it's Saturn return, and it isn't always easy. Anybody's Saturn return isn't easy, right? But anyway, Pisces and Virgo season, and Pisces goes along with Virgo, and I thought this would be a good video. So hopefully you all enjoyed it. If you're interested in learning in this way, or I'm learning the basics, which I can do, I'd be happy to work with somebody, but also then learning through actually experiencing and studying charts. I would get a hold of me. Like I said, I could do up to 3 people at once, but really not more than that. But definitely one-on-one, like I'm doing now. I would be happy to work with you. My email and my website info is down below. So get a hold of me. And of course, if you just like to have your chart read and understand your chart, I'd be happy to do that. When I do birth chart readings, I actually go through and explain to people what their placements are, what they mean, and answer their questions, and help them understand how they might be able to work with it, but also understand, certain themes in their lives, and which is very helpful, right? And then you can learn how to study your own birth chart. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful. I appreciate you all being here. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I will see you next time, hopefully very, very soon. And until then, may the stars forever be in your favor. Bye for now.